In the beginning, a young man dies due to a god's mistake, and is now being sent to live a new life in a new world by the goddess of reincarnation. He trades his memory of his previous life for the skills he wants in the new one, and grants his new self, Kelvin, an opportunity for a fresh start and unlimited fun in the new world. In the opening scene, a young man awakens in an unknown land and is presented with a mysterious floating manual with an option to start an adventure. He clicks the start button and is immediately greeted by a virtual feminine voice who congratulates and informs him he was chosen at complete random to be reincarnated into another world, and all his memories from his previous world have been wiped clean. The voice from the manual assures him he had agreed to the conditions before being reincarnated. The voice goes on and explains to him that he is in a fantasy world full of clashing blades and mages flinging magic, and he had beforehand chosen the skill he was to possess before he was reincarnated. She loads a status screen and urges him to look at it for the details. She shows him the details. He learns his name is Kelvin, a 23-year-old man. The virtual voice announces his adventure begins with him going to a nearby town. She informs him there is a guide, and he might want to register as an adventurer in the town. He eagerly agrees and begins to make his way to the first nearby town alongside the virtual manual. After walking for some time, Kelvin asks the virtual manual if she is coming along. She reminds him that in his past life, he had requested her, the goddess of reincarnation, to become his servant, and mentions the reason the likes of her can talk is so that communication will be possible between summoners and their servants. Now in a town called Parth, Kelvin figures out he died in an accident supposedly caused by a god Melfina, who went to the goddess of reincarnation to ask for her intervention, and when he saw the goddess, according to her, he fell in love, and right now can only hear her voice in his head. The voice narrates how as soon as his past self chose his skill, he asked her to make a contract that she becomes his servant, which she agrees to for reasons of wanting a vacation. While the goddess kept talking about her leaving her work post and handing it over to her workers, Kelvin passed by a glass window and quickly walked back to check his face out for the first time. She gushes over not being able to take a break in decades and informs him he decided to get rid of his pre-reincarnation memories in exchange for more skills. Kelvin asks if he can summon her physical presence, but she informs him he does not have nearly enough MP to summon her yet. The voice announces they are almost at the Adventurers Guild. Kelvin spouts over how big the building is, and eagerly makes his way inside. In the building, Kelvin finds himself in a crowded space filled with adventurers. He lines up to be attended to by a staff. When his turn is reached, the female staff welcomes him and asks what brings him to the guild. He explains to her he would like to register as an adventurer and is handed a form to fill out. The staff member asks if he needs someone to help him fill it out, but he assures her it is not necessary. The voice asks him not to expose being a summoner because it is an ultra-rare job, and there is typically at most one per nation, and if they find out he is a summoner, the nation's rulers will take an interest in him. Kelvin decides he does not want that and agrees with himself to put his class down as a green mage instead and submits the form. The staff requested him to wait a bit after submitting. While waiting, Kelvin begins thinking how lucky he is to end up in a fantasy world and his plans to enjoy freedom as long as he can and also keep his mouth shut over being a summoner. In the next scene, he is given a guild membership and is told he is starting at rank F. The staff shows him a placard of the places they receive jobs from and tells him adventurers are divided into different ranks for various places. Kelvin asks if he can only take F rank jobs and is told an adventurer can take jobs up to one rank higher than his current rank, and if he fails, he will have to pay a contract penalty. But if he manages to complete 10 jobs in a row, he will go up adventure rank, and also extra pints are not rewarded for taking jobs above one's rank. But once he reaches rank C, he will start having to take exams. After explaining the instructions, the staff tells him to do his best. Kelvin asks if they have new jobs for new adventurers, and the staff kindly shows him lists of places to work on. The goddess suggests he goes after the blue slime and make a contract with one while he's at it. She points out it will be the perfect monster for his first summoning. He announces his choice of taking up the blue slime's quest and requests to buy a wooden rod. On his way out of the guild, the voice of the goddess commends his decision to choose a wooden rod that possesses a bit of magic. After a while of walking, he spots a herd of blue slimes and quickly hides in the shrubs to not scare them away. The goddess's voice in his head suggests he uses an appraising eye on them. He activates the skill of eye appraising and begins to read the data about the blue slim. The goddess informs him he can appraise creatures up to 100 levels above him and items up to rank S. He asks Melfina how he makes his summon contract work and is informed by the talking voice in his head that he needs his target's consent first. He ponders over how to get the consent of the blue slimes. Melfina lets him know that to get the consent of creatures unable to communicate, he has to attack and weaken them, then use the contract, and they will consent. Kelvin launches his first attack, but fails to land a blow on his target. The blue slims run into safety after one has successfully landed a blow at his attacker. He complains about underestimating the monsters to be the weakest and easiest to defeat. Now back and prepared, a blue slim amongst the herd makes mockery of Kelvin, who decides to loudly convey his second blow. The slim manages to dodge all blows thrown at it while landing several successful blows of its own. Kelvin tells himself to launch more careful attacks after noticing the speed of the monster. He launches a calculated attack against the blue slim and misses his first blow, but quickly relaunches another attack and successfully hits the slim hard, weakening it. He stretches out his right hand. He staggers after feeling a draining energy from his body. The voice in his head informs him that summoning contracts uses half one's remaining MP whether the process succeeds or not. He succeeds at his first trial and absorbs the defeated blue slime monster. Melfina congratulates him on a successful contract and urges him to name the monster he just made a contract with. Kelvin chooses the name Clotho and welcomes the monster aboard. He discovers he can sense the feelings of the blue slime and notices it is happy. He decides to try his summoning power after doing the math of how much MP he has left and asks if it will work out. Melfina assures him that it is enough to summon a blue slime. He successfully summons a blue slime. Kelvin is surprised after learning that slimes grow by eating weaker slimes. He instructs Clotho he is free to absorb any slime it defeats, but they are desynthesizing the slim cores to prove they defeated them. The servant and master launch their first attack against the herd of slimes and can defeat 2 slimes, and Kelvin notes how much faster Clotho is compared to before the contract. Miss Menu announces an S-Class Summoner's Enhancement adds 100 points to all stats. Melfina informs her master that he is currently the only S-rank summoner to exist, and that the others are much weaker and are in lower ranks. After being paid for a job well done, Kelvin rejoices over having enough to afford food and a room for the night, and makes his way to the recommended inn he was told about by the attendee at the guild. At an alley, Kelvin sees a small crowd admiring 2 chained-up slaves in their cages, and suggests since he has more summon slots open, it would be a good way to strengthen his party. The slave trader advertises his captures to the crowd, and he spouts over being able to obtain an elf. An old man in the crowd adorns being able to own an elf. He soliloquizes about beautifying her with a bit of money. The slave trader admits she is a mixed-blooded half-elf and was only lucky to obtain her at such a good price. Kelvin watches the elf intensively, but walks away. Now at the Spirit Sing Inn, Kelvin requests for an overnight room from a staff member he met. She introduces herself as Claire, and he introduces himself as Kelvin. Claire instructs him to get some rest in his room while she prepares a meal for him. Kelvin complains about not having a bathroom. Melfina informs him there are no bathrooms except in the castles of kings or mansions if nobles and commoners wash themselves in the river or wipe themselves down with hot towels. Kelvin lies down on his bed and hears his stomach grumble and jolts upwards to get something to eat. In the next scene, Kelvin is presented with a sumptuous large meal and begins eating as fast as he finds possible. In the Adventurers Guild, Kelvin is congratulated by an attendant over being able to be promoted to a rank E adventurer. 2 random adventurers complain about the newly registered adventurer, who was registered as rank F going solo. Other adventurers speculate a mage screwed up at his job and had to become an adventurer. A blonde man adjacent to him advises Kelvin to pick the rank D mission of conquering the Black Ghost Knight. The attendant identifies the man as Cashel. Cashel likewise identifies the attendant as Ange and informs her of his arrival. Ange welcomes him back and asks how his job went. He brags about executing a fine job as expected. He focuses on Kelvin and congratulates him for his promotion. Kelvin asks who he is, excuses his mistakes, and introduces himself as Cashel, a rank D adventurer. Some adventurers seated in the space discuss him being a liar and being as strong as a rank B adventurer. The other adventurers begin gossiping about Cashel and the new intake. Cashel clears his throat, and the gossipers rearrange themselves. He invites Kelvin to join his party, who are currently after the Black Ghost Knight. Ange warns Kelvin that although the Black Ghost Knight is a rank D job, he is reported to be stronger than others and is too dangerous for him who just got promoted to a rank E. Cashel assures her that if he is willing to join, they will look after him. Kelvin politely declines the offer and states that someone as weak as he is of no help to their group. He uses his eye appraising to collect data on Cashel and notices his stats are as high as Clotho's. Kelvin proposes they compete to see who can defeat the Black Ghost Knight monster first and ensures he will go solo. Cashel informs him it is impossible to beat the best solo no matter how strong one is, but accepts the challenge and asks if it is okay. He is going with a party as planned initially, and Kelvin agrees. Melfina asks her master if he is sure about his decision. He confirms and adds that he is looking for a way to show off what he has gained from his leveling and training. In a hidden part of town, Cashel questions one of his party members about what he had gathered about Kelvin. The rough-looking member states he has an appraising eye of rank C, which means he also has a rank C concealment at least. Cashel is amused, and a big bald one-eyed man, Raj, asks if he gets to hurt him as he did to the previous adventurer. Cashel orders him to keep calm. Several nights later, Cashel and his party members set out to fight the Black Ghost Knight in his castle, but are greeted by Kelvin, who had beforehand destroyed all of the undead soldiers. Cashel frowns at the veteran staff Kelvin is holding and assumes he is a green mage. Raj mocks him for not being able to beat the knight on his own, and that was why he waited for their arrival. Kelvin disposes of his implications and calls them out for going after him as their main goal. Cashel asks Kelvin if he was hired by the guild or is only after the bounty of his 2 members. The third member connects the dots of not being able to read his rank and asks if he is a bounty hunter pretending to be a rookie. Kelvin is astonished to learn about a bounty, but Melfina assures him it changes nothing. Kelvin baits the big bald man to come after him. Raj furiously goes after Kelvin, ignoring Cashel's warnings not to be provoked. He tries to land a point on Kelvin, but begins to sink into the ground midway. Kelvin unleashes a rank D green magic, Mudvine, which turns the ground beneath his enemy into a bottomless muddy swamp, binding them in place. Cashel observes Kelvin's using the concealment skill. He informs his last member. The Mudvine takes time to activate, and he has set it in place earlier, but hid it with concealment. The third member frighteningly admits his concealment could not detect it. Raj tries to struggle out of the Mudvine, but is attacked by 2 wind magic blades. He braced himself and was able to dodge on and break one. Cashel dodges the second wind blade traveling in his direction, but the third member barely escapes it. In fear, the third member apologizes and runs for his life. Cashel begins to charge against Kelvin, who is being informed by Melfina over the current status of the battle. Kelvin assures her it is all in his plan and summons Clotho, who had evolved from a blue slime to a slime glutoni, against Gimel and orders it not to let him escape. Clotho mercilessly defeats Gimel. In the other room, Raj frees himself from the Mudvine and assures his master he will take care of the slime. Clotho catches him midair and squeezes him tightly. Meanwhile, Cashel charges towards Kelvin, and the two clash against each other. In the following scene, a badly beaten up Cashel complains about how strong and untouched Kelvin is before passing out. After dealing with them, Kelvin opens up a door and prepares to finally meet the famous Black Ghost Knight. He uses his appraising eye to scan the data of the monster. He begins to gush over how lovely it will be to have him at his party. The knight threateningly asks what he wants from him. Kelvin confidently admits he has come to defeat him, but has changed his mind. He introduces himself as Kelvin the Summoner and requests to make a contract with him. In the next scene, the knight laughs at how most people lately just run at him with a sword when they see him, and tells Kelvin he is the first one to talk to him. The knight mentions he only became a monster with a personality a short while ago, and he used to be a knight's captain serving his country. He tells him he does not know why he became a monster. Kelvin is confused over how friendly the most feared knight is to him. The knight goes on with his explanation of not knowing the reason he was protecting the castle they were in and offers him some candy. Melfina informs Kelvin the knight is just happy to have someone to finally talk to, and reminds her master about the contract. Kelvin composes himself and asks the knight if he wishes to make a contract with him. The Black Ghost Knight points out that since the country and king he was serving are all gone, he is more than willing to serve a new king, but he wants to know how worthy his new commander is. Kelvin agrees and challenges him. The knight is flabbergasted over Kelvin challenging him. In the next scene, the two men take their stance and Kelvin refers to the knight as an old man, but the knight corrects him by saying his name is Gerald. Kelvin charges forward to launch an attack. He throws a wind magic blade towards him, which he destroys easily, and commands Clotho to attack him. To his surprise, Gerald stopped all of Clotho's attacks from his blind spots. Melfina informs her master that Gerald possesses a mind's eye and can get a bonus for any decision that requires an instant reaction. Gerald urges Kelvin to give him his all or there would be no point to their fight. Kelvin launches a green magic spell called Earthen Rampart, which raises a tall wall made of rocks against him. Gerald commends the slime for having all kinds of tricks after attempting a self-destructive trick and begins to raise his sword. Melfina requests her master jump as far as he can to his side. Just as he jumps to the other side, Gerald breaks through the earthen rampart. Kelvin complains over not being able to see him move his sword and launches another green magic against him called the Cleft Chasm, which vibrates the ground and sends light blades towards an enemy. The knight can counter the light blades despite the unsteady grounds. Kelvin is stunned by the successful counter the knight has delivered. He watches in amusement as Gerald defends himself against every blow Clotho shoots against him, and unleashes his third green magic spell called Air Pressure, which locks his enemies in place with the help of air pressures. He instructs the knight not to die. Gerald assures him he will not die, but suddenly begins to glow. Memories of his past life begin to come back. Gerald has a flashback to a country named Alcarl, and one day a messenger named Gildora came to offer the king of Alcarl to serve his nation, the Lazia Empire, and destroy the Holy Empire of Daramus together. The king refuses his demands, but the elf messenger reminds him not to forget that if he refuses to obey Lazia, his kingdom will pay a price for his negligence. The price was paid in blood. On a deathbed, Gerald's wife, Betty, begs her husband to take care of their daughter Connie before passing away. The king of the kingdom had poisoned himself upon seeing his city fall, and in just a few days, Arcarl fell. He sets out of the city with his horse, who died along the way, and begins walking with his daughter in his hand. Gerald strongly announces that avenging his nation, Arcarl is what what keeps him in the new world, and breaks free from the air pressure Kelvin had trapped him with, and begins charging towards Kelvin. Kelvin launches another attack on the earthen rampart. Meanwhile, Gerald asks him if he is willing to help him avenge his nation. Upon seeing that the earthen rampart did not work against him, Kelvin launches the air pressure spell against him, and orders Clotho to absorb and rain the pressure severely on him. The Black Knight is sent flying backward. He thinks about his wife and daughter in his past life, and is launched exceptionally far into the sky. Clotho looks up and gives a satisfying scoff at the flying knight. The next day, Kelvin submits a fragment of the Bacat Ghost Knight's armor, and is celebrated by the crowd for completing an almost impossible mission, and gushes about how thankful they are that he was able to get rid of Cashel and his party members. In another scene, Cashel and his party are being threatened by a guard to confess all the crimes they had committed and are to expect the death penalty. In the guild, cups of beer are raised in celebration reference to Kelvin's victory, who is being called aside by Ange. She informs him his last job was designated as far surpassing rank D, and thus, he shall be given a special rank increase, and a personal thanks from the head of the guild. She rejoices over his success and tells him he is full of surprises. He agrees and recalls how truly strong the Black Ghost Knight was. Gerald teases Kelvin over Ange and suggests she is a candidate for his harem. Melfina opposes and informs him she is already his fiancée. The two argue over the matter, and Kelvin instructs them to stop talking in his head. He instructs Gerald not to call him his king, and Melfina his fiancée. Gerald informs him a knight can only serve a king. Melfina asks her master to look in front of him. He sees an old man staring at the window. The old man commends how beautiful the day is, and mentions it is a perfect day for an adventurer. Kelvin agrees. The gentleman laughs out loud and comments it is good to be enthusiastic about one's work, but all in all, one needs to rest sometimes. Kelvin gives out a small laugh and mentions it was the old man's idea from the onset, pointing out it was a perfect day for an adventure. The old man introduces himself as Leo, the head of the Parth Adventurers Guild, and informs him he has a slightly silly question for him. He uses his appraising eyes to scan while asking him if he is from another world. Kelvin, in return, uses his appraising eye skills to scan the guild master. He is flabbergasted upon learning the old man has an appraising eye of rank A, beating his concealment, rank B, and is afraid the guildmaster can see who he truly is, a summoner. In the next scene, Leo and Kelvin discuss over tea. Leo explains that Ange told him what happened with Cashel, and how he defeated the Black Ghost Knight with his servants, and accused him of being a summoner. Gerald instructs his master to straighten up, and after all, it is impossible to keep his status hidden forever. He should instead make more friends, so he can share his secrets. Kelvin decides to play the conversation calmly, and confesses to not being able to hide from the guild's master, appraising eye of rank A, and tells him he bets with the eye of his. He probably knew Cashel and his buddies were criminals, and asks why he did not stop them. Leo chuckles and apologizes for not doing anything about the debacle, and informs him Cashel is a noble from the militant nation of Trion, and it is hard to do much about a foreign nobleman. He needs proof, but assures him he will get just what he deserves. Kelvin requests they cut to the chase. Leo admits he is not his enemy, but rather his mission is to create a friendship, and tells him he met with others from another world once. Kelvin is amused to learn there are other people like him. Leo mentions the heroes of the Holy Empire of Deramis. Melfina recalls why she reincarnated the heroes and promised to explain to Kelvin later on. Now on his feet, Leo narrates how the priestess of Deramis heard the prophecy of God and summoned the heroes. He walks up to the window and continues his narration of what he had said. The revival of the Demon King is upon them, and suggests that is why monsters all across the continent have grown so violent, and the reason the Black Ghost Knight was so strong is likely due to the Demon's King revival. He states that even the heroes cannot protect an entire continent if the Demon King is truly returning. He would rather like them to focus on his defeat. Kelvin asks Leo if he wants him to protect him from the monster instead of the heroes. Without giving a response to Kelvin's question, Leo mentions the city does not have enough people who can handle a rank B and higher jobs, and offers to use his authority to increase his adventurer rank and allow him to decide which job he takes. Kelvin points out that the deal is a little too much in his favor. Leo asks him why he had been hiding the fact that he is from another world and a summoner, and answers himself by suggesting that he was trying to avoid a ridiculous power struggle between nobles. Leo offers that if he is willing to side with him, he can promise him freedom most of all. He points out his skills are equal to those of a rank S adventurer, and he is going to have him climb to the top before he is forced to join someone else's cause. Kelvin agrees to help him since his conditions are agreeable. Claire gushes over Kelvin being promoted to a rank B adventurer and promises to make an extra side dish in celebration of his promotion. While eating his lunch, he asks Melfina about the explanation she promised him earlier that day. Melfina narrates that a long time ago, the priestess of the Holy Empire of Deramis performed a summoning ritual to reincarnate chosen people, but they are all at a low level in the current world. He recalls when Leo narrated the story of the priestess of Deramis, but Melfina tells him not to worry about it. Kelvin summons Clotho and asks it to give him the reward money he gave to it, and commends its inventory skill. On his way out of the inn, Kelvin asks Claire if she could set out another plate for the night's dinner, and she happily accepts. Now in town, Gerald teases him over it being the time he yearns for a female touch, but is corrected by his master that the reason for his slave shopping is because the last time he passed by the slavers, he thought of getting a slave to enhance his party. Melina asks if he is going to train her and add her to his party. He agrees, and admits there is one slave his eye caught the last time. At the slave trader's abode, Kelvin notices the elf he had seen the other day tied up in a cage. The slave trader walks up to him and informs him she has a powerful curse that burns anyone who touches her. Kelvin scans her attributes using his appraising eyes and is amused that her skill points are untouched. He asks Melfina what he needs to do to break the curse placed on the elf slave. She informs him the course resembles a fire dragon king's curse, and a sacred bless spell from a white magic rank a user would do it. Kelvin offers to buy the cursed elf slave. On the way home, the slave thanks him for purchasing her and introduces herself as Eiffel. He in return introduces himself as Kelvin and an adventurer. He asks if she would join his party and fight with him, and how long she had been a slave, and she tells him for as long as she remembers and does not know who her parents are or why she is cursed. Kelvin tries to console her, but she jolts backwards and complains of not wanting to hurt anyone anymore. He tells her to trust in him and easily breaks the curse bestowed upon her. He unlocks her chains and assures her she will no longer harm others with the curse. She goes down on her knees and begins to cry to her new master. At the inn, Claire welcomes him and announces food is already on the table. Kelvin asks if she can find clothes for Eiffel after dinner, but Claire insists she must be dressed properly before eating and drags her to get a change of clothing. After a long wait, Eiffel is presented by Claire in a mouth-watering attire. Kelvin blushes and commends her. She assures her master to do her best from that moment henceforth, and she looks forward to serving him. Claire apologizes for taking her time and goes to serve them dinner. He exposes his secret of being a summoner and has her take the same skills he has. Everything was going perfectly except for the sleeping arrangements. Kelvin had requested a second room with a bed, but was denied one for reasons of no available rooms, so they were forced to share a bed, and Kelvin began to find Elif cute. A month after Eiffel joins the party, she alongside her master Kelvin spends the whole month leveling up and doing jobs. Within the month, Eiffel uses up her points on archery and far-seeing. She also learned sewing after leveling up. Kelvin also took a blacksmithing skill and is still practicing. The combination of Eiffel's high-level archery skill, red magic, and Fire Dragon King's grace gave her the original technique. In the Adventurers Guild, Ange commends Kelvin over another successful job and informs him he has had a total of 9 successful missions in a row. And if he is successful with one more job, he can take the rank-up exam. Eiffel assures her master he will soon become a rank A adventurer. Kelvin also returns the flattery by telling her she just became a rank C, but in no time, she will be promoted to rank B, but he admits he feels bad for her opponent in the mock battle during the last exam. Ange informs Eiffel there is a new sweets place that just opened and invites her on a treat. Kelvin watches the two girls discuss and is invited by Eiffel to the sweet treat. Ange advises Kelvin not to turn down a girl who asks him out sweetly. He agrees and promises to go the following day. The following day, Kelvin tries to convince himself that the outing is not a date and more of an ordinary hangout. He wonders how Melfina would be in his case if she were there. Melfina had earlier left his servant's network that morning, saying she was going to go give a divine oracle. Ange walks up to him and asks for the whereabouts of Eiffel. Kelvin informs her she told him it would take her time to get ready and asks him to go in without her. Eiffel walks in marvelously dressed and asks her master, who has knocked off his socks by her appearance, how she looks. Anger urges Kelvin to compliment her. He blushes and tells her she looks good. Eiffel blushes over her master's compliment. Now in the sweet shop, Kelvin compliments Eiffel, who tries to feed him some sweets, once again for looking good. He blushes and nervously tells her not to feed him in public. Anger teases them by asking if she has been feeding him at home all this time. A group of 3 men identify the girls eating with Kelvin, and jealousy complains over the new intake snatching up the girls. Meanwhile, Kelvin overexcitedly denies that she only feeds him when he is tasting Eiffel's cooking at the inn. Eiffel is confused over his reaction and asks if she did anything wrong while Ange tries to force-feed Kelvin. The ladies around gossip over the girls, fight over the young man. Nervous and sick of the hangout, Kelvin requests he leave and wants to take the sweets home but is misinterpreted by the crowd, and they all coo over him taking the girls home. 3 men, 2 tall and 1 short, walk up to the shop. The short man complains that commoners should not be engaging in romance in public places, and kicks off the table accustomed to Kelvin and the girls. Kelvin, in disbelief, demands an explanation for the uncalled-for behavior. The tall man by the shirt man's right commands him to kneel, and introduces his partner as Tabra, the 3rd Prince of Trion. Ange informs Kelvin that Trion is a big military country to the east. Prince Tabra comments on the beauty of Ange and Eiffel. He offers to forgive Kelvin for his crimes if the 2 girls submit themselves to him. The guards walk forward to collect the girls for their master. One of the guards receives the first wind punch, and then the second. Prince Tabra looks in fear As Kelvin begins walking up to him, Prince Tabra fidgets and claims he cannot be touched as a prince. Kelvin raises his hands and casts the air pressure spell against him. He asks what the prince is doing in Parth. Tabra nervously informs him he came to meet Leo at the Adventurers Guild. He claims he heard a powerful adventurer has started using Partha as a base and has come to investigate the rumors personally. Kelvin points out he has extremely weak guards for a prince embarking on a journey. Tabra states that Trion believes that talent is everything and those with talent rules, but since he is talentless, there is no place for him at all. The prince admits his plans of making a powerful adventurer serve him so he could earn some glory. Kelvin informs him he is most likely talking about him. Tabra asks if he will serve under him, but Kelvin refuses almost immediately. In the Holy Empire of Derami Great Cathedral, a priestess prays and asks for the presence of the goddess Melfina. Melfina greets the priestess, Colette, and asks about the well-being of the heroes. Colette shows Melfina the growth of the heroes and begs to be granted her oracle because she senses an evil presence from the western continent. Melfina orders her to send the heroes and keep them away from Parth, and Colette assures her she will. At night, Ethel asks if her master is awake. Kelvin asks what the problem is, and she begins to thank him for saving her from the hands of the prince earlier that day. He tells her it is not a problem, and apologizes for them still sleeping in the same bed. Ethel worriedly asks her master if she is not attractive to him as a woman, and begins to shed tears. Kelvin nervously instructs her to only do such with the man she loves. Ethel confesses she is in love with him as her master as a man. Kelvin holds her and begins to draw her in for a kiss, but is caught off guard by the slave necklace on her neck. He draws back his actions and tells her she is cute and more attractive than any girl he knows. Ethel jumps on her master for his kind words, and Kelvin begins to reason that buying a house with separate rooms for both of them is the only way he can survive. The following morning, Kelvin and his servants, Gerald and Clotho, tread through manuals of the heroes. Ethel walks in with a tea refill and asks her master if Melfina is back yet. A little part of Clotho attaches itself to Ethel's shoulder, allowing her to participate in the servants' network. Melfina tells Aleph she just got back. Gerald points out his observation from the manual, that heroes do not appear to be strong at all. Kelvin admits he was expecting heroes to be at least a level 100 since they were summoned a year ago. Melfina equally admits her disappointment and wonders if they will make it in time for the Demon King's revival. Kelvin brags about his perfection in blacksmithing, but Gerald teases him over his failed inventions. He commends his master. He is right to be proud of his rank a dreadnought, a shield-like weapon. Gerald comments on how impressive his master's other recent inventions are, and Melfina expresses how proud she is of their growth and wishes the Daramus Knights were half as strong as them. Claire knocks at the door and requests Kelvin's attention. She informs him at the other end of the door that the guilds are calling him. In the next scene, Leo tells Kelvin about the demon which was witnessed in a rank D dungeon, the Hermit Cave, by adventurers who were exploring the cave. They found a secret room, and there it was. Melfina informs her master that demons are one of the strongest races along with dragons and angels. Kelvin is surprised the adventurers managed to make it back alive. Melfina explains to her master that a demon's strength varies greatly depending on the individual, and even the weakest amongst them are around rank B. Leo tells Kelvin he was told he met Prince Tabra from Trion. Kelvin lies of not being able to, for sure, recall a memory of such. Leo complains over having to clean up behind a ruffian who assaulted the prince, and how the matter is at the brink of becoming an international incident with Trion, but asks if Kelvin is willing to accept the job. Kelvin hurriedly accepts. In the rank D dungeon, Hermit's Hollow Kelvin and his servants are greeted by a man, Erd, who comments to have not seen Ethel since her last exam. Ethel assures him she is doing fine and is glad to see him. Erd asks about the knight standing behind Kelvin. The knight introduces himself as Gerald, a friend of Kelvin's. Kelvin asks what exactly they are looking at. Erd informs him they have erected a barrier around the building and are monitoring it carefully, and there is no telling how effective a crossfight is going to be against a demon. Melfina explains to her master that a crossfight is probably useless against anything stronger than a rank B demon. In the next scene, Erd shows the room leading to the underground cave and apologizes for not being able to follow him, but Kelvin tells him it is better that way. Ethel casts a spell for illumination, and a ball of light travels down the secret room. Kelvin instructs Gerald to take the lead while he and Ethel walk behind him, while Clotho stays at their rear. In the basement, Gerald complains about walking for quite some ways, and Ethel adds they have yet to see any monsters. Kelvin suspects something must be wrong because he does not sense any life at all in the cave, not to talk of monsters. They soon approach a large door. Kelvin senses two life forms in the closed room. He assumes one is probably a demon, and the second is badly weakened. Ethel asks her master what they are going to do. Kelvin informs them the seal is still intact and will be dealt with later, but they will deal with the other one first. He opens the door to reveal a large room surrounded by piles of dry bones with two pillars, used for the captivity of a red-headed woman, in the center of the room. As they make their way towards the tied woman, a demon springs up from the left pile of bones and introduces himself as the archdemon Victor, and expresses his pleasure in making their acquaintance. Kelvin lets out a sinister smile over the thrill of fighting a worthy opponent. Victor laughs and seals the whole room, including the door, with magic, and tells him the tied-up girl is the Demon King's daughter. Melfina informs her master that as far as she knows, the present Demon King Gustav did not have a daughter. Kelvin openly states the current Demon King Gustav did not have a daughter. Victor explains the king did not have a daughter officially because he had a great deal of enemies and wanted to keep her existence a secret. Victor points out it was a good idea to let the ones who found his abode escape, and admits only humans can break the seal he created earlier. Kelvin asks if the whole point is for them to untie the redhead woman, but the demon chuckles and assures them that his agenda is eating them and absorbing their powers. Victor launches his first attack, but is countered by Gerald's dreadnought. Victor announces his unique skill, gluttony, which lets him steal the characteristics of those he eats, and it is more effective the deeper the relationship he has with his prey. Kelvin complains about how much of a talkative the demon is, and figures out loud he wants to eat them, get the characteristics of humans, break the seal, and then bring the redhead back as the new Demon King. Kelvin attempts to strike down the demon with the help of his spear. It hits the demon, who excitedly confesses he only got half of the story right. The demon absorbs the magic and explains he was the caretaker to Sarah, daughter of the Demon King, and so she is in a way his daughter, and if he eats her, he will become incredibly powerful and become the new Demon King himself. Kelvin figures Victor is a rank S monster, and gushes over never meeting an enemy as strong as him. Gerald explains to Ethel that their master is unable to control himself in the face of dire peril and overwhelming power. Victor summons the Hades army by giving magical lifelines to the piles of bones in the room, laughs about no longer being outnumbered by his opponent, and commands his army to attack by clicking his fingers. Kelvin figures the multitude of bones launching at him are all as strong as rank B monsters. He decides to take them out from a distance to prevent close-range battle. He launches his spell, Wind Shoot, which sends a bright wind blade to his enemies. He manages to eradicate a tangible number of bones. Gerald begins close battles with some of the surviving bones. He defeats them all with one strike of a sword each. He sends a yellow wave of light through his sword and destroys a great number of bones in the distance. Gerald offers to take care of the bones and tells his master to fight the few he misses. The demon commends the team for not only being powerful, but also their perfect harmony. Kelvin walks up to him and tells him to show him more tricks in his sleeves with a maniac smile on his face. Victor offers to wipe the smile off of his face. The demon hits his purple glowing fists against the ground and launches a smoke bomb. Kelvin assures Gerald to be calm as he is currently tracking the movements of Victor. He tells his Black Ghost Knight that the demon is coming up from underground to attack them. Victor launches his first attack against Gerald, who can counter his attack with his dreadnought. Victor is astonished that the knight was able to sense his presence. Gerald launches his favorite move of the yellow wave, and Kelvin commends his servant, but quickly notices a glowing spot under his right foot. Kelvin jumps into the air as quickly as he can, just in time to avoid the violent tail of Victor. Gerald and Victor engage in a close-range battle. Victor lands a powerful magical blow enough to knock Gerald down. Victor stretches his arm to attack Kelvin while Kelvin is distracted by the arm. Victor appears behind him and attempts to eat him. Kelvin immediately summons Clotho, who launches himself onto the demon's arm and begins to absorb his magic. Victor tries to get rid of Clotho, but Kelvin attacks him with a magic spell called Glory's Sanctuary. It launches a bright blue, wide spectrum of light, which eventually turns to a chain-like element after being in contact with the enemy. Victor comments he had no idea his opponent possessed such powers. Gerald walks up to his master and commends his move, but Kelvin warns him it will not hold him for long. Almost immediately, Victor breaks free from the Glory Sanctuary. Upon seeing how strong the demon is, Kelvin commands Gerald before launching another spell called the Vortex Edge, which surrounds Gerald's sword white a misty magic. Victor makes mockery of them, not paying attention, and sends his arm behind Kelvin. The demon announces this beforehand, but Kelvin surprises him with a maniac smile on his face, and corrects him he had just lost against them. Kelvin summons Eiffel behind Victor, who gasps and complains over not being able to detect her level of stealthiness. Eiffel launches her blaze arrow against him. Victor turns around and blocks the arrow with his right palm, which instantly burns. Gerald assures him they are not done with him yet, and strikes him down with the Vortex Edge. Victor soon finds his left arm detached and on the floor. Kelvin commends his servants, but tells them the Glory Sanctuary spell has expired, and he commands them to all fall back. Victor gives out a maniac laugh and tells Kelvin he is the second human to do this much damage to him, and he figures all the peace in the current era has dulled his edge. Kelvin asks his opponent if he is about to give up, but Victor once again gives out a small laugh and informs him the battle has only just begun. Victor covers his entire body with a spell called the Jinn Scrimmage. His whole body is engulfed with the deep blue matter. Kelvin instructs his servants they are not waiting for him to finish casting out his attack, and begins to charge toward Victor with a spell called Clef Denton, which installed the ground and travels with a yellow bright light. Simultaneously, Eiffel launches a Pyrohydra Primary, which shoots a magical Forerunner arrow against her enemies. Victor counters the spells used against him easily, and Gerald sends his spell called Agito, which launches a yellow bright light from his swords against his enemies. Kelvin orders Gerald to turn on his loyalty skill up to its full power, and the knight asks him if he is sure of his decision. because if it is turned to the fullest, it will not last long. Kelvin tells his servant he needs to survive the demon. Victor announces it is time for the final round. Kelvin agrees and asks him to show him all he has got. Victor lifts himself off of the group and charges against Kelvin and his servants. Kelvin orders Gerald to activate an emergency defense and launches a spell called Earthen Rampart. Gerald blocks the blow from Victor and is warned by Melfina that if he cannot block the attack, the left will collapse and encourages him to give it all he has got. Gerald assures her that a real knight will never lose and pushes Victor off of his stance. Victor calls Gerald a fool and attacks him violently as he is about to finish Gerald. Aoife launches an arrow against him and urges Gerald not to give up just yet. Gerald assures her they are just getting started. The two begin impounding Victor with attacks. Elif launches a Pyrohydra secondary against Victor. Kelvin summons Clotho, who releases multitudes of swords against his master's opponent, and Kelvin simultaneously launches a Radiance Lander, a spell that sends a powerful bright white light. Eiffel combines her master's magic with a blaze arrow. The hit against Victor's chest sends him flying and destroying a wall. He sees a big rock falling toward the Demon King's daughter, and with all his remaining strength, Victor swiftly picks himself up to save her. Kelvin and his servants walk up to the defeated demon, lying powerless on the floor. Victor surrenders to his opponent, and Kelvin asks why he lied about wanting to eat the Demon King's daughter. Victor admits that if he had not lied, Kelvin would have not fought him so hard, and her father had entrusted her to him several years ago to be his daughter's caretaker. Victor has a flashback to training the Demon King's daughter for battle, and the Demon Princess complains about not being able to put her magic into her punches. He assures her she has a long time to learn since demons live for a very long period. The Demon Princess, Sarah, expresses her disappointment over her father's selective visits. One day, the heroes came to conquer the demon's kingdom. The Demon King Gustav ordered Victor to continue watching over Sarah and to keep her existence hidden from both humans and other demons, and put a seal on her that only humans could break, which activated after his death. Victor admits to waiting for the day when the hero would die, and the war would become but a distant memory, an era of peace and weakness where the princess can rule as the new Demon King. He begins to choke on his blood and mutters about the failure of his plans. He begs Kelvin to let Sarah join his party. Kelvin asks if Victor also wants to be his servant, who declines the offer with reason of being loyal to only one king, and begs Kelvin once again to let the princess join his party with his last breath. Kelvin and his servants watch Victor succumb to death. Simultaneously, the seal he had activated before the fight began to gradually fade. Kelvin lifts the seal placed on the demon princess. She wakes and begins to cry over Victor and her father. Kelvin promises to honor Victor's dying wish. Now, outside the cave, the team walks towards the adventurers watching the building. Erd asks if everything went well, and Kelvin tells him it did, and orders Eiffel to give him proof of their defeat. Erd questions the redhead he had on his back. Kelvin lies to him that the demon was possessing her when it was sealed, and she is probably what the first part of the adventurers saw. Kelvin inwardly explains that the camouflaging hairband the princess had on keeps humans from seeing her demon horns and wings. In the next scene, Gerald evolves and is resummoned by his master as the Abyssal Knight Commander. Kelvin is fascinated over the points Gerald has acquired. He walks up to where Sarah is seated, and she asks him if he is sure he wants the daughter of Demon King Gustav as a servant. Kelvin assures her he has a rank S concealment, so she does not have to worry about anybody using appraising eyes to see her status. Sarah asks who he is, and Kelvin admits he is just an ordinary adventurer who likes to fight. She explains she has never left the castle and does not know how the town looks, but the other servants confirm she has no reason to be nervous. That night, Kelvin is promoted to a rank A adventurer, and is told that if the demon he conquered was found to be rank A or greater, they were going to use it as a test for the promotion exam. In the inn, Ange throws him a surprise promotion party where they all drink in a stupor. Kelvin wakes up in the middle of the night and searches for the princess, who is looking at the stars outside, having an imaginary discussion with Victor about how much she loves the world and promises to live her life to the fullest. Kelvin and his servants are on their way to the water country Taraj. Kelvin recalls his discussion with Melfina the previous night. She informs him she can possess one of her avatars and hide the fact that she is a god. She excuses herself on a vacation with a mission to Tigné, one of her avatars, and assures her master if it works, he may be able to summon her. Syrah tells Kelvin some people have been watching them in secret, and almost immediately, a band of thieves famously known as the Black Wind stops their carriage. The coachman trembles at the mention of their gang name. Kelvin asks him who they are, and the coachman explains to him that they are a band of thieves that became famous in Toraj a while back, and supposedly a rank A adventurer from Trion destroyed them. The female amongst the thieves mocks them over trembling at the mention of their names. Kelvin issues his appraising eye to figure out she is at a level 25 to a bit over 30, and orders Sarah to take care of the disturbances. Sarah confronts the thieves and easily rounds them up. The tied-up woman warns them about her boss. Now in the Toraj Adventurers Guild, the guildmaster, Mist, thanks Kelvin for capturing one of the leaders of the Black Wind. Kelvin, alongside his servants, sits together in the office of the guildmaster. She tells him Leo had told her a lot about him, and she explains that 20 years ago. She confesses her disbelief over the fact that the party that took down the Black Wind became them. Kelvin states that the Triton famous warrior Kristoff destroyed the Black Wind of Toraj because of the Black Wind. The Guildmaster agrees, and disappointedly tells him that they had started secretly kidnapping people and engaging in the slave trade. Sarah eagerly points out that if they knew where they were, she could take them down. The Guildmaster informs her that they are in Toraj. Eiffel suggests they go to them that instant, but Kelvin tells her it is not that easy. The Guildmaster agrees and explains to them that Kristoff is a national hero in Trion, and if the matter is not handled carefully, it could turn into an international incident between Toraj and Trion. Sarah argues over them not being able to do anything despite the proof they had gathered. Kelvin asks the princess to calm down and tells her what the master was trying to say is that they need to make preparations before taking control of the situation. Kelvin and Sarah begin to have an inward discussion. He asks her if her detection skills are picking up a group of 4 powerful adventurers. She informs her master that she senses somebody relatively strong at the entrance of the town with a likely level of 50. Kelvin suggests they have the heroes' party do all the work. A moment later, the Guildmaster requests the heroes to help them with the problem of the Black Wind. The leader of the party, Toya, agrees. The Guildmaster has a flashback to when she and Kelvin curated the plan of using the heroes, who are symbols of justice, to defeat the Black Wind. She points out that if that happens, Trion will hardly retaliate. In the domain of the Black Wind, Hope, a member of the gang, is cleaning his dagger in a dungeon full of human slaves. He is reminded of the job his master assigned. He stands up, opens the door of the dungeon, and comes back to pick a prisoner. He picks a little girl whose mother begins pleading to him not to take her daughter. Hope struggles to break free of the mother's grip on her daughter, but is interrupted by Kelvin and his servants. He demands who the strangers are, and quickly figures out they were the ones who defeated a number of them earlier that day. Kelvin commands Gerald to knock him out, which he does in one single punch. Kristoff discusses the arrest of one of his gang members with his colleague, but is interrupted by a loud bang against his door. The door opens and reveals Hope, who in a matter of seconds falls to the ground like a statue. Kelvin and his party barge in to attack the 3 bandits. Kristoff asks if the intruders were the ones who took down Karna. He removes his mask and comments about being able to enjoy their fight, but Kelvin lets him know they were not there for him and could care less what he enjoys. In the next scene, the heroes are checking the dungeon out in search of the Black Wind. Toya asks one of his party members if she can sense anything. Setsuna informs Toya that there are a lot of people in one place further in, but is unable to see past that. Another member senses the wall and discovers no sign of combat or dead bodies and tells the group their top priority is to find someone so they can figure out what is going on. The heroes brace themselves and open the door. To their surprise, they are faced by a giant slime. Toya tries to attack the slime, but is told off by the little girl. She warns him the slime is the pet of the man who saved them. Her mother quickly apologizes to her daughter and explains she is only a huge fan of the adventurer who saved her, and the slime was a part of his party. Toya apologizes and walks up to them. The mother asks who the suited man is. Toya introduces himself as the hero of Deramis, Toya Kanzaki. The prisoners rejoice at the mention of his name. The mother of the little girl apologizes for not realizing he is a hero. Another member of the party, Nana, hugs Clotho and tries to communicate with it. She explains her discovery to her party members that the slime tells her it was ordered to stay there and protect the people who were kidnapped. The little girl's mother begs the heroes to help out the rank A adventurers who saved them. She tells him there are still dozens of bandits left. Atheist leaders are all veteran warriors, and no matter how strong they are, they cannot win alone. The heroes rush to give out helping hands to the said adventurers. By the time the heroes get to the bandits' office, they meet them passed out on the floor. Setsuna mistakes them for the rank A adventurers who arrived first. Toya apologizes to the injured people on the ground and runs to the waiting room to face the bandits. In the other room, he meets Kelvin and his party with a sinister smile on their faces. Toya accuses the group of being the Black Wind. Kelvin scoffs and tells him how pathetic and weak the beaten-up adventurers are with a sinister smile on his face. Toys introduced himself as the hero of Deramis to his opponents, and his companions followed the route. Setsuna Shiga, Nana Mizuoka, and Miyabi Kuromiya. Toya gives a speech about their job being about justice. Kelvin laughs out loud at his dramatic actions and offers to play a game. A battle between him and the 4 of them, where the loser has to grant the winner any one wish. Setsuna warns Toya not to, and suggests their opponent is hiding something. She tells him he cannot fight the opponent alone, and they have to do it together. Toya agrees and accepts Kelvin's challenge. Some hours ago, before the heroes arrived at the Black Wind's base, Kelvin and his party set up the waiting room and discussed their first plan to use their wish to make the heroes testify about the slavers, so that Kristoff and the others would not be able to have Trison's protection anymore pose as the Black Wind, and the second plan to pose as the Black Wind to fight with the heroes. In the present, Toya announces to his party that they cannot lose the challenge even at the cost of their lives. The heroes call upon their respective fairies to lend them their powers. Kelvin finds their use of the fairies' grace skills interesting. Toya tries to be the first attacker and runs towards his opponent. Kelvin uses the Radiance Lancer against him, and Toya nearly manages to block one of the strikes. Setsuna blocks the second strike and sends a yellow glowing wave against Kelvin, which he dodges easily. Nana sets free her dragon and attacks Kelvin with flame breath. Kelvin weaves the fire with the help of a sonic accelerator, a spell that allows him to move around much faster. He moves behind Miyabi and strikes her with his Skin Eater, a glove he made that can copy an enemy's skin just by touching it. Kelvin tells Miyabi he copied parallel thinking skills from her. Toya charges towards Kelvin and swings his sword against him. Kelvin dodges all attempts Toya throws at him. Nana runs to heal Miyabi, who is passed out on the floor. Toya aggressively questions Kelvin over what he did to Miyabi, but Kelvin assures him he did not do anything. Toya orders Nana to keep healing Miyabi and Setsuna to protect them. He tries to fight Kelvin in a one-on-one battle, and after a series of dodged attacks, Kelvin lands a magical punch against Toya's sword, sending him backwards. Toya bounces back up and begins striking. The two men soon engage in a serious fight. Setsuna runs to help out Toya. Kelvin jumps and calls upon a spell, Adamantine Rampart, which breaks the ground and springs up tall rock walls. Setsuna executes Zantetsukan, which allows her to jump exceptionally high and cut through almost anything. After the rock wall expires, Kelvin shows up with a sinister smile on his face and lands a white heavy ball on top of Toya and Setsuna. Nana worriedly calls the names of her party meme bees after watching the ball explode destructively. Toya can block the blow, but starts bleeding profusely from his right hand. Nana offers to heal him, but he tells her he does not need healing and gives a speech about his duty to defeat the Demon King and every other thug and bad person. Setsuna slaps him hard across his face. She asks him to think about himself for once with tears in her eyes. Kelvin and every other person in the room watch the awkward scene play out. Setsuna narrates an experience of theirs. She recalls a day when the heroes were talking in their classroom, and a magic circle suddenly appeared on the floor, and in their dreams they saw a goddess. They suddenly woke up in the Daramus Great Cathedral and met Colette, the priestess of the land, who admits to summoning them. She had been scared of the new world, but she was able to make it this far because the four of them are always together. Setsuna accuses Toya of always trying to do everything himself. The other members confirm the accusation, and Setsuna tells him he needs to let them help him too, or he will never beat the Demon King. Toya hits his head severally with his left palm and apologizes for not thinking straight. He announces the four of them are heroes together. Kelvin asks if they are done with their show. Toya apologizes for keeping their opponent waiting. Before Kelvin could regain his stance, a light fairy exploded brightly beside his eyes. Kelvin inwardly interprets the situation. He points out the light. Fairy does not show up on detect presence, but trying to blind him by getting one close without him noticing means the heroes are getting clever. Nana unleashes Frostbound, which allows small pillars of ice to travel and climb up the enemy's feet, locking him in place. Simultaneously, Miyabi unleashes Felony Crush. Kelvin complains about feeling a massive weight and not being able to move in his stuck legs. Setsuna and Toya begin charging towards him to land the final blow. Kelvin performs a spell called Cleft Detonation, sending the heroes flying across the other side of the room. Toya points out that without the Light Fairy's shield, he would have been in danger. He hears Setsuna coughing and asks if she's okay. She assures she is, but without her Heaven's Walk skill that lets her move in midair, and the Wind Fairy's speed boost, she is unsure how she would have survived. She supposes the massive explosion likewise did some damage to Kelvin. Kelvin unleashes the Blind Cure, which is a white magic that cures lost sight. Nana points out he destroyed the ground under him to cancel her Frostbound. Kelvin announces he is not ending the game with his spell. He instructs Nana and Miyabi to follow up their debut spells with some attack spells. Miyabi vows to never forgive him for humiliating her twice. Kelvin calls upon Setsuna and tells her to work Heaven's Walk into her attacks, and they're to way to read right now. Turning to Toya, Kelvin asks when he is going to use his dual wield. Toys figures out his opponent possesses an appraising eye, and admits he never expected a bandit to be as strong as him. Toya vows to use his full strength. He calls upon his holy sword Will to reveal its true form. Kelvin gives out a maniac laugh when Toya begins charging at him. Nana unleashes a spell, Frozen Temple, which allows large pillars of ice to shoot out from the ground. Kelvin is stuck once again in ice, and Miyabi summons the Grave Death Ogre. Sarah, who is sitting amongst the spectators, asks if her master needs help. Miyabi unleashes the Gloomlancer Agassi at Kelvin. Kelvin expresses his excitement over the sudden twist in the battle. With a sinister look on his face, Kelvin summons the Adamantine Guardian, who counters the Gloomlancer spell. He orders the golems to delay the heroes for 30 seconds, and inwardly complains that the Frozen Temple restricting his movement is bad news. Kelvin calms his mind to concentrate on creating the incarnations needed for a new spell. He inwardly admits creating the precise mental images and necessary incarnations for a new spell is a long, complex process with many difficult steps. But with parallel thought, he can do all of that at once at hyperspeed. Setsuna executes the Zentetsukan against Kelvin. But before she can strike him, Kelvin completes his creation and unleashes Radiance Crossfire, a series of white fires, on the pillars of ice and destroys it all at once. Kelvin informs them he can analyze anything with his appraising eye, including magic, and he had already known the way to destroy the frozen tower before she finished casting the spell. Setsuna charges toward Kelvin, who commends her for incorporating Heaven's Walk into her attacks, and for having the best combat sense amongst her party. He punches her mid-air, making her fall before completing her move. The Grave Death Ogre that Miyabi had created begins launching blows at Kelvin. He notices Miyabi has put status effect inducing black magic on it, and destroys it in one blow. On air, Nana rides her dragon, and assures Toya she is going to shield him, and he should go for his move. Nana calls upon the icicle shield to protect them. Kelvin commends Nana for having almost the same endurance as Sarah. He unleashes Glory's Sanctuary, and temporarily seals her. Kelvin once again unleashes Hyper Impact upon Nana. The pressure of the Hyper Impact forcefully breaks the seal, and sends her to the ground. Toya catches her before hitting the ground, and in pure anger questions the nerve Kelvin had to hurt his friends. He blindly attacks him but gets blown up into the air. Kelvin tells him what he thinks now is how a hero should be, but he should not try to force his ideas onto him. He tells him if he wants to change the world, he needs to get stronger, and if he is unable to, he should lie on the ground and whine. Toya apologizes to his party member before finally passing out. In the next scene, Toya wakes up during his party, the little girl, Kelvin, and his servants. He jolts up to attack Kelvin but finds out his sword is missing. Kelvin shows him and pats the slime. Toya suggests he and his party are the adventurers that came ahead of them. The little girl confirms his suggestion. Kelvin apologizes and introduces himself as an adventurer. Toya asks in confusion why he made them fight him, but figures out he was indirectly training them. With tears in his eyes, he kneels before Kelvin and pronounces him the winner. Kelvin assured him everything was okay, as long as he granted his wish from the game. He playfully asks Toya to start stripping. Silence and confusion flood the room, and they all begin cooing. The guildmaster assures Kelvin that the mother and daughter are in safe hands, and as well as the others Blackwind captured are returned home safely. Likewise, the Blackwind themselves are imprisoned. Days later in a cave, the heroes fight against a water-bred monster, the Octogigan. Sarah joins Kelvin on his spectating rock and asks why he decided to train them. He tells her he has no reason, but he might have chosen a liking to them because they are heroes that Melfina chose. He inwardly admits his reasons to be because they are from his other world. Sarah informs him she was sure that he would try to raise their levels and then fight them again. Kelvin excitedly agrees to do just that, but Sarah asks if he could let her join next time. Simultaneously, the heroes rejoice over defeating the Octogigant. Kelvin tells them it is time to eat. Toya and Setsuna discuss how the dungeon bosses are getting stronger now that the Demon King is revived. Eiffel asks who the Doramus priestess is, and Toya narrates to the two groups how Kali, the Doramus priestess, summoned them to the New World, and tells them he alongside the three girls was talking in the classroom when a magic circle appeared in the floor, and everything went black then. The goddess appeared, and they woke up in the Daramus Cathedral. Kelvin points out that they had teleported between worlds and asks Toya if his team is struggling against an Octogigant. What will they do if they meet a strengthened rank S dungeon boss? Toya admits they are not strong enough to win such battles yet, and will instead run for safety. Sarah drags along a water monster, and announces to the team she caught a big fish. The monster, which happens to be a dungeon boss monster Sinister Dragon, questions who dares to disturb his slumber. Kelvin tells him if he chooses the option of running, the people who live around the premises will suffer. While Sarah begins fighting the monster,
Toya confesses to Kelvin that he will not let his party die for nothing by fighting reckless battles, and even if people call him a disgrace, he will train and come up with a plan until he can fight the battles safely and win. Toya's party members smile approvingly at his speech. Kelvin informs him he passed his test and rises to defeat the monster.
At the harbor, the heroes bid Kelvin goodbye and are given 3 pendants by Kelvin to boost their mid-stat and perform one other spell. He tells Toya to think of the pendants as a good luck charm. Toya appreciates him and promises him the next time they meet, they promise to be stronger. Gerald walks up to his master, who is staring at the open sea, and asks if something is wrong. Kelvin asks him if they could win if they were to pick a fight against the Lazia Empire at that moment. Gerald tells his master that at first, he never really thought it was possible, but now that they have a bigger party and can defeat rank S monsters, his wish, which he thought was once impossible, feels like it can come true. Gerald thanks his master for his consideration. Kelvin suggests they fight more strong foes on the current continent they are before carrying out his revenge. Gerald thanks him for his kindness. Sarah informs her master a messenger from the guildmaster is here and claims somebody wants to see him. Kelvin begins to rejoice after figuring that the country's king wants to see them. In the castle, Kelvin comments on how the structure of the castle looks almost Japanese. Gerald informs him he was told the first ruler of Taraj came from another world, just like the heroes, and that is the reason the castle has such a unique shape. Kelvin and his servants bow to the king of the land and are shocked to hear a woman's voice. She welcomes them and introduces herself as the current ruler of Toraj, Tsubaki Fujiwara. He, in return, introduces himself as Kelvin and as the leader of his party. Kelvin inwardly points out Fujiwara sounded like a Japanese, and she is the first person he has seen to have a family name. Tsubaki thanks them all for destroying the Black Wind Bandits and defeating the boss of the Dragon Marine Caves. She instructs them to raise their heads and informs them under normal circumstances the entire country would celebrate their deeds. But since Trion is involved, they cannot tell the people what has happened just yet. She offers to repay them for their good deeds and urges them to ask her if they have something they want. Kelvin asks for her to give him the right to purchase rice, which is a commodity that is never allowed outside the border of Toraj. Tsubaki asks if he wants any other thing, but Kelvin assures her that will be all. Tsubaki accepts and assures him he does not need to buy, but rather, he can have as much as he likes, and if he runs out one day, he should send her a letter to request for more. Several days later, Queen Tsubaki invited Kelvin and his party to stay in Toraj. Eiffel serves her master, who praises her perfection in Japanese cooking. She informs him the queen gave her everything he needed. In the next scene, the queen joins Kelvin for lunch and desperately tries to convince them to stay permanently, but they politely decline. The queen announces she will give them a special way to get home. In the next scene, Tsubaki presents a teleport gate to her guests. The queen explains to her that teleporting takes a massive amount of magic, as well as the permission of both gate's administrators. Kelvin asks if they had permission from Parth. Tsubaki informs them it is already written in their guild IDs, and the gate's administrator, Guildmaster Leo, has permitted them. The teleport gate opens, and Kelvin, alongside his party, make their way home. At the inn, Claire welcomes Kelvin and reports to him that she heard the ruler of Toraj took a liking to him. Kelvin asks where she heard such rumors from, and Claire admits Ange has been telling everyone she met about it. Kelvin assures her he is happier as a free adventurer. Eiffel offers her master some tea and asks what next they are to do. Kelvin tells her he has decided to take the day off and is going out for a while later. Kelvin shows his party the mansion he bought, and they all comment on how much they each like it. He tells them they can choose whatever room they wish. Eiffel requests for the one next to her master, and joyfully runs to look for the kitchen. Gerald asks his master if he may go to look at the basement he says would make a good training room. Kelvin describes the direction of the basement to him, and watches him walk towards it. Clotho uses body language to request for a habitat outside the house, and Kelvin assures it that the whole of the yard is its domain henceforth. Kelvin rejoices over being able to finally have a proper bath. The little girl and her mother from the dungeon were employed by Kelvin to be the house servants by chance. The mother introduces herself as Ellie, and her daughter Luca, who thanks them for having them. At night, Kelvin relaxes after taking a bath and commends his new home and how it feels like he has come a long way. He points out that the new bed is unusual, but begins drifting off. He jolts up upon noticing the arrival of Melfina. She apologizes for taking longer than she thought to adjust her avatar to her needs. Kelvin assures her not to worry, and asks if he can summon her right away. She confirms and teases him that she is ready to steal his heart once again. Kelvin summons Melfina and nervously tells her she is exactly his type. At their new home, Kelvin and his party enjoy a sumptuous breakfast. Melfina introduces herself to the group. She asks Sierra if she will be comfortable around her as the Demon King's daughter, but Sierra assures her it is all good. She blames her father for going too far, and after all, Melfina is not responsible for summoning the heroes. Over lunch, Kelvin asks Melfina if it is okay to go by the name Melfina, since she's a famous goddess in Duramus. She agrees it is a bad idea and tells them to call her Mel henceforth. Melfina offers to reward her master for being able to summon her. She grants him the grace of Melfina, goddess of reincarnation. Kelvin asks if it is similar to Eifel's Fire Dragon King's grace or the hero's fairy grace. She explains to him he has just received the goddess of reincarnation's grace, which has two effects. The first is that once a month it will completely prevent damage from a single wound that would otherwise be fatal. And the second and more important one is that he has been given the ability to summon heroes. A while later, Mel finds her master on the balcony and shoves a chocolate snack in his mouth. She asks him if there is something he would like to ask her. He asks the goddess why she needs heroes. She commends his question and tells him before she tells him the reason, she needs to first explain more about the Demon King. She states that in their current world, the appearance of a demon king is something that occurs in regular cycles and cannot be prevented. She tells him even though she cannot tell him what form the next demon king will take, all demon kings have possessed a special skill, Papias, which has two effects, namely, the first is that it multiplies the evil within them to the point that it wraps their personality, and the second is that it nullifies all damage. Kelvin asks how one is supposed to defeat them if they cannot be injured, and she tells him that is where the heroes from another world come in. She says their power is fundamentally different than any in the present world and can neutralize a Demon King's invincibility. Kelvin asks if that also means his attacks would work on the Demon King too, since he is from another world just like the heroes, and points out there is no need to call them heroes. Mel agrees and explains it is only right for one to give things the proper appearance. Kelvin questions the goddess if summoning them from their world and forcing them to be heroes is fair on their part. Mel sheds light on the question. She explains if her one is uncertain about summoning someone from another world, she recommends a reincarnation summon. Kelvin asks her what she means by reincarnation summon. Melfina tells him there are two ways to summon someone from another world, which are teleporting them to the current world or reincarnating them. She explains to him that teleportation is bringing in a living person from another world, while reincarnation summons the soul of a dead person. Kelvin points out that the heroes were teleported while he was reincarnated. Mel explains to her master that reincarnation takes a massive amount of MP, so it is not good when one needs to summon multiple people, like the Daramus heroes. However, it is more convenient to summon a single powerful person like himself. She adds to her explanation that another thing to know is that during reincarnation, one can select skills and perks one wishes, and since one's body is rebuilt, their appearance and age can be changed too. Kelvin surprisingly asks her if she means he does not look like his present self. Mel assures him he kept his appearance and age, and that changing them would require skill points. Kelvin asks if he can choose the souls that are reincarnated, but she lets him know it is a random process. She mentions he does not need to hurry, because he only gets one chance, and there is no limit on it, so he should spend as much time thinking as he likes. At night, Kelvin calls his servants in order and informs them he is ready to summon heroes. His servants rejoice over having new members to spar with. Kelvin begins the first step of canceling his physically summoned servants. Ethel presents her master with a recovery potion which he takes to recover his MP. Kelvin orders Mel to begin the reincarnation summoning. She asks her master to decide the number of people he wishes to summon, as well as the amount of magic he wishes to use. He tells the goddess to use all but one of his MP to summon a single person. Melfina informs her master the preparation for the process is complete. Kelvin creates the spell and waits. He asks Melfina why the process is taking so long. The goddess tells him the individual is uncertain of what skill to pick. Kelvin assumes the process might take a whole day, but Melfina tells him time flows differently between the two different worlds, so it will not take that long. She informs him the individual has chosen their skill and chose not to change their age or appearance. Lightning strikes into the castle and reveals a female child. She asks where she is. Kelvin introduces himself by saying his name, and as an adventurer, the little girl eagerly introduces herself as Ryoseki and tells him the angel told her she was coming into another world and asks if that was true. Mel mentions to her master that the angel the little girl is referring to is a servant of hers that she left in charge. Kelvin lets Ryo know he is the one who caused her to be reincarnated and begins apologizing for reincarnating her for his selfish reasons, but is interrupted by Ryo, who thanks him with tears in her eyes. Kelvin nervously urges her to stop crying and she begins to sleep in his arms. Kelvin asks Melfina if she is sure the little girl is the hero. Melfina assures him she is the best summon possible since he used all his MP on her. Exhausted, Kelvin passes out on the basement ground. Ryo wakes up in the middle of the night and goes outside to the yard. She trips after attempting to run around the yard. She lies down on her back and starts appreciating the beauty of the night sky. Kelvin walks in on her and talks to her about his first time in the new world. Ryo is surprised to learn he was reincarnated just like her. He tells her he had died because of a god's mistake and was lucky enough to reincarnate, but traded his memory to enhance his skills and summarized his life so far in the new world. Kelvin tells her he brought her to the new world mostly to satisfy his ego, but if she does not want to remain in his world, he is not going to force her. Ryo violently insists she wishes to stay and explains to him she spent the whole of her past life as a sick person who could not go outside, let alone to school, and the only way she enjoyed herself was through novels. Ryo tells him the only things keeping her going were novels and window watching, and when she died, she wondered what the point of her life was. She thanks him for giving her another opportunity to live again in an improved and whole body, and asks him if to let her join his party. Kelvin tells her to think it through, but she assures him she is sure about her decision. Kelvin informs Ryo that black hair is very rare in the current world they are in, and he would like to introduce her to everyone as his half-sister who came after him from a different land. Ryo happily agrees, and mentions she was an only child in her past life, and begins suggesting what names to call him. She decides on Brother Kel, and Kelvin approves of it. He asks her to change her name because her current name sounds too similar to a distasteful man he knows. Ryo suggests her name should be Ryan. Kelvin accepts and welcomes Ryan to a fantasy world of clashing swords and powerful sorcery. In the dark purple forest, Ryan gushes over the dungeon and likens it to a video game. Ellie asks why she and her daughter are out in the forest with them. Kelvin announces he wants to increase both of their levels a little, and he has stationed golems to guard the mansion. Luca mentions she has never fought monsters before. Kelvin assures her it is fine, and she, her mother alongside Rion, will stay at the front of the dungeon, and they will be using his experience sharing skill. Melfina explains to the ladies that an experience sharing skill shares the XP one gets from defeating a monster with all party members. Syrah urges Clotho and Gerald that they should all race to see who can hurt the most enemies before the time limit. The three girls begin leveling up. Elif informs her master inwardly that a monster, Shadow Wolf, is on its way to them. Kelvin responds inwardly to her and orders her to not shoot it, but to let it through instead, and outwardly asks Ryan if she likes dogs. Ryan tells him she loves dogs. A big black shadow wolf appears at them and growls loudly. Kelvin orders Mel to keep the ladies safe while he takes care of the shadow wolf. The shadow wolf charges at Kelvin, who defeats it in one blow. The wolf eventually succumbs to a summoning contract. Kelvin's servants applaud their master over a successful battle. He resummons the shadow wolf, which now appears to be calm and friendly. Ethel stands on a tree branch and scans the surroundings. She inwardly informs her master that Urdu's party is coming up from the rear. Urd walks up to them and asks Kelvin what he is doing at the entrance of the forest. Kelvin tells him they were out for a little picnic and returns the question to Urd. Urd informs him his party just got promoted to rank B, and their exam is to defeat a specific number of monsters in the forest within a certain time. He asks Kelvin if the many pretty women and girls he is surrounded with are in his party. Kelvin explains they all are except Ellie and Luca, who are not adventurers but maids at his mansion. Urd's members complain about having only men in their party. The men begin bickering and eventually all leave the scene. Sarah, Gerald, and Clotho arrive and inform their master that on their way back from hunting down monsters, they met Urd and his party. Kelvin narrates they had just been promoted and were in the forest to hunt monsters for their passing exam. The group of three nervously looks at their master. Ethel uses her far-seeing skill and informs her master there is not a single monster in the forest. In the next scene, Kelvin bows and apologizes to Urd for making him fail his exam. Urd assures him it is okay, and Leo will understand if he explains to him. He commends Kelvin for curating an incredibly powerful little gang, and tells him he is truly worthy of the Rank S exam. In the yard, while Kelvin and Ryan are washing the summoned wolf, he ponders out loud over a memory of Urd telling him about a Rank S exam and how he is sure Leo was planning on keeping it quiet just to drop it on him out of nowhere. Ethel points out to her master that he has always been promoted under special circumstances, and the Rank S exam will be his first official exam. After washing the shadow wolf, Kelvin wears a collar around its neck and mentions to Ryan that Alex, the wolf, is now part of their family, and from now on she and the wolf are partners. Ethel figures out Ryan can communicate with the monster. Ryan tells her she possesses a skill that allows her to understand monsters. Gerald calls Rian into the mansion to resume sword training. Many days later at night, Sarah informs her master that some people have surrounded the mansion and are acting suspiciously. They discuss the placement of the party members. Ethel and Mel are in their room sleeping while Gerald is guarding the maid's room. Kelvin uses his car-seeing skill to scan the surroundings of the mansion. He discovers they do not look strong, and that his chess level amongst them is 20, but retracts his words after citing a man at level 26. He points out the man is far apart the others, and suggests he might be their boss. Ryan asks how he can see that far outside. Kelvin tells her he had borrowed the far-seeing from Ethel with his skin-eater glove. Sarah asks her master if she should take care of the situation. Kelvin smiles and asks Ryan if she and Alex can handle it, and informs her Silent Whisper is active inside the mansion's gate. He tells her he will call the golems guarding the gates inside and advises her to start with the ones who cross inside first. She assures Kelvin that she is up to the task. He orders Clotho to make a mini version of it for them so they would be able to join the servant network and communicate through their minds. Kelvin instructs her that he will upload the information he learns from Detect Presence and Far Seeing to the servant network for her to use. He hands over a resonating mithril sword he uses his blacksmithing skills to reforge from a guy named Cashel to Ryan as her first weapon. Ryan earnestly thanks him. Outside the mansion in the bushes, a man mentions he is told that the master of the mansion was working with the Doramus heroes when their master Kristoff was captured. 14 men in black jump above trees to rain attacks on the mansion dwellers. Ryan and her wolf, Alex, charge toward the gate to protect their home while Kelvin and Sarah watch in the distance from a window. Sarah comments that Ryan's sword moves and her harmony with Alex. Ryan defeats all the intruders and rejoices with Alex over their first and successful mission. Kelvin orders Sarah to talk to Ryan and Alex while he takes care of the rest of the hiding intruders. The leader of the attackers tries to call his men to retreat but is instead faced with the mansion's master. Kelvin informs him his sister has taken down all of his men. The masked man figures out the Doramus heroes were not the ones who defeated their master Kristoff. Kelvin gives out a sinister smirk, and the scene goes black. In the Triton castle, court men and women are sitting around a round table. A man amongst them begins the meeting by giving a salute to the emperor, he says. In the of Triton, emperor of the militant nation of Triton, he begins the meeting of the round table. The emperor, Triton, discusses with his court what he deems a serious matter. The dragoon general and son of the emperor, Asgrad Triton, asks if the matter is about Kristoff, and if securing slaves in Taraj was Tristan's idea. Mixed Demon Beast Army General Tristan Faze admits he had such high hopes for the Black Winds, but they were just barbaric adventurers, and not useful for anything. Iron Steel Knights General Dan Dalba chastises Tristan for giving meaningless excuses, and complains that the incident has brought some of their nation's shadows to light. Dan announces the countries, Gaun, Toraj, and Deramisare, already allying. He furiously asks the table who amongst them will take responsibility for their failure. Tristan urges the general to calm down. The general begins to argue but is called to order by the Dark General and daughter of the Emperor, Shutora Triton. who reminds the bickering men that they are in the presence of their emperor. Emperor Zell supports Dan's speech about their nation being in dire peril. He mentions he has been telling the other country leaders that Kristoff has anything to do with Trion, but that alone is not enough. He points out that if they are not careful, they could find themselves in a war with all the other three nations. Tristan insists they have a war, but Dan accuses him of being insane. Tristan explains that while they were militarizing, the other three countries were enjoying the peace, and now their weak armies are no match for the Trion army. He suggests it is time to achieve their long-held goal of unifying the continent. The princess agrees that unifying the continent is one of their great goals, but insists that now is not the time to unleash such a plan, and that their armies are not as weak as assumed. Prince Asgrad announces he is in support of a war, and states that he had several skirmishes with Gon's forces, and they did not seem that strong to him, and he and his men have something special up their sleeve. A sick smile crosses the faces of people at the round table. Princess Shutora asks her brother if he wants to try out the new power he has. Tristan points out the vote count for war so far is 2 in favor and 1 opposed. General Dan insists the idea is ridiculous. Tristan admits the vote count is equal and asks for an absent General Clive's opinion. The emperor laughs and agrees to leave the gate of their nation to the vote of 5 generals and orders the arrival of the absent General Clive. In the Magic Knight headquarters, a knight, General Dan's son, announces himself as Jindalba, a member of the Iron Steel Knights. He informs the general that the emperor requires his attendance at the round table and urges him to come immediately. The Magic Knight's general, Clive Teresse, stands up creepily from his chair and lets go of his robe to reveal his nakedness. He asks the knight if he is pretty. In the Creased Forest, southwest Gon, Kelvin and his party are on their way to see the Beast King in the elven community. As they approach the village, Eiffel informs her master she finds the place feels like she had been there before. Kelvin tells her that elf blood in her might make her feel at home in an elf's land. Kelvin has a flashback to when Leo presents Kelvin with a job. He shows him an envelope from Leonhart Gon, the Beast King of Gon. He informs Kelvin the Beast King wishes to meet him personally and wishes him good luck on his rank S exam. In the carriage, Eiffel asks what the Beast King Leonhart is like. Melfina tells her, as is customary in his nation, he left on a journey in his teens to learn to fight and ended up becoming a rank S adventurer. Ryan points out that if he is that strong, he should have done the job requested by Kelvin himself. Kelvin suggests there is a 99 chance Trion is somehow involved, so they should each give it their all. An arrow is shot a few paces away from their carriage. Kelvin notices elves stationed in trees around them. He raises the envelope given to him by Leo, which contains a royal stamp, and announces he is there at the order of King Leonhart of Gon. He introduces himself as Kelvin and as an adventurer. A one-legged elf introduces himself as Nelrus, the elder of the elf village. He informs them that the Beast King Leonhart had told him all about them and thanks them for coming as requested. As Nelrus begins approaching the group, he is drawn aback by the existence of Lumil, Elif, and asks how she is alive. In the elves' palace, Kelvin proposes to talk about something else before proceeding to discuss the king's request. Nelrus asks if he is referring to him mistaking Eiffel for Lumil. Kelvin urges Nelrus to tell him about Lumil. Nelrus narrates a story of 20 years ago, when the elves lived in peace, deep in a forest on the western continent, and one day, the elven community was attacked by the Fire Dragon King. One of the great dragons demanded they offer up the elves who had humiliated him, or he would burn their village to ash. Nelrus admits to not knowing what had angered the king since the elves barely had any contact with him prior, but his wrath was terrible, and over half of the village died without even knowing the reason, and his leg was injured too. But one of them rose, Lumil, and stood before the Fire Dragon King, and begged the Dragon King to turn his wrath towards her and spare the others. The Dragon King said she was not the elf he sought, but if she agreed to be his bride, he shall forget the insults he suffered. Lumil agreed, and the Fire Dragon King took her away. After the narration, Gerald asks the elders their reasons for leaving the western continent after the wrath of the Dragon King has been resolved. Nelrus tells him years later, Lumil's body was found in the forest. Until the present day, they do not know what happened, but with Lumil dead, the elves feared the Fire Dragon King's return and fled the western continent for the eastern continent. Sarah suggests that if the elder had mistaken her for Lumil, it might mean that Lumil is Eiffel's mother. Melfina shuns the suggestion by stating that half-elves are the result of a human and an elf, and if she were the Dragon King's daughter, the dragon's blood would be too strong. Kelvin points out there is still a possibility that Lumil is Eiffel's mother. Nelrus apologizes to Eiffel for not having any more information about Lumil. Kelvin points out that King Leonhart had said that a new type of monster has been kidnapping elves. Nelrus affirms and mentions they have a powerful barrier in the forest that disrupts one's sense of direction, but the monsters seem to know exactly where the village is. Kelvin ponders over the existence of a skill that can nullify barriers. Nelrus informs him it has come 2 or 3 times, and it looked less like an all-out attack, but rather like an attempt to kidnap elves. Kelvin points out monsters do not possess that level of organization, and requests permission from Nelrus to renovate the village to ensure the monster no longer longer has access to the community. Nelrus permits him to do whatever he can to prevent the monsters. At night, a group of soldiers alongside their commander are leading the monsters through the forest to the elves' village. A random soldier tells his commander the Gons are nowhere to be found. Another soldier makes a mockery of them for being scared of the mixed demon-beast army. The commander suggests to his men that the Gwans must have noticed they were the ones leading the monsters and warns them to watch out for ambushes. He says they give the Gwans plenty of information and then take out whoever they send to stop them, and General Tristan's plan is ready for its most important stage. One of the soldiers begins a speech about having firepower, but gets shot across the chest in between his speech. Another soldier gets shot across his chest, sharing the same fate with the other soldier. The commander demands what is going on, and one of the soldiers assessing the situation tells him the stricken men were hit by something that looked like an arrow. The commander dismisses his assessment with reasons for not hearing the sound of an arrow. Another soldier is attacked, and soon enough, many of them follow. The commander orders his men to protect themselves from the monster, and informs them the enemies are using a form of invisible attack. On top of an ill-shaped rock, Kelvin instructs Eiffel to make shots at selected targets. He commends his servant for hitting the target and explains he had built the ill-shaped rock to be a watchtower with adamantine rampart, a green magic spell, and Mel's blue magic spell, False Fog, makes it invisible outside the walls of the elf village. He also made the walls massively stronger, and water in the moats is enhanced by Sarah's black magic, so that even if the enemy gets close, they will not be able to make it inside the village. In the soldiers' camp, a runaway soldier reports to the vice commander on his knees that they almost made it to the elf village but were attacked by an unknown enemy. Unit 4 has been wiped out, and the battalion commander has been taken by non-Guan soldiers. The vice commander stands up from his post and questions who the unknown enemies might be. The soldier informs him they are a set of adventuring parties, and the Unit 5 is engaging them at the moment. But it will not be long before they locate their main camp. Mel and Ryan arrive at the camp, and the vice commander calls upon the giant lord, a gigantic giant, to attack the enemies. Rian comments on how big the giant is. Melfina suggests Alex and his partner should go and defeat the giant monster, and tells Ryan if she manages to defeat it, that would mean she is a full-fledged adventurer. Ryan assures the goddess she is up to the task, and rides her partner towards the monster. The giant lord unleashes its first punch at Ryan, but misses. Alex and his partner run upwards the giant's arm. Alex jumps and scratches its eyes while Ryan attempts to pierce its skull with her sword. To her surprise, the sword shatters upon hitting the monster's skin. The vice commander makes a mockery of her for using a worthless blade against their rank S monster. The giant lord successfully lands a partial punch on Ryan, which sends her flying through the air. Ryan lands with her feet on a rock. She points out that if the monster manages to get a clean hit on her, she is as good as dead. She has a flashback to the last discussion she had with Melfina. The memory is enough to boost her determination to finish the monster. Ryan charges towards the monster, and she orders Clotho and her shadow wolf, Alex, to back her up. From the back, Clotho vomits 2 swords for Ryan to catch. The soldiers point out that only a hero can manage dual wielding. Ryan tells them it was in her skill list with other things, so she did not know. Ryan and her wolf once again climb up the giant's arm and unleash Generate Edge. Many body-round hits with 3 swords accompanied with lightning on the monster. The monster falls to the ground, and the Trion vice commander orders it to transform into Gigant Furnace. The giant unleashes massive flames all over its skin. The vice commander commands the monster to burn its opponent with purgatorial flames. Nonetheless, Ryan walks over the flame and lands on the monster's shoulder. She comments the flames look a lot weaker compared to Eiffels. She once again performs Generate Edge with her wolf and disintegrates the giant for good. Melfina commends Ryan for her good work. Meanwhile, as Eiffel and Kelvin are watching the battle unfold, they are attacked by purple magic, but can dodge it. Clive, who is floating in the air alongside his men, expresses his disappointment at missing Kelvin and Eiffel. Kelvin faces his enemy with his signatory sinister smirk. Kelvin looks up at his enemies. Clive tries to use his charming skills to force Eiffel to become his slave, but Kelvin manages to disrupt his move from reaching Eiffel. Clive calls Kelvin a ridiculous nobody and mocks him for thinking he can stand up to him, the general of the Trion Magic Knights. Kelvin looks at him with a deadly glint in his eyes and warns him to never lay a hand on his woman. Clive asks him if he feels embarrassed over calling the elf his woman. Kelvin uses his appraising eye on him and makes mention of how Clive's status is centered around his unique skill, and asks if he is reincarnated. Clive points out his concealment is of a rank, but the fact that his appraising eye can see through it implies that he is also reincarnated. Kelvin instructs Eiffel to get inside the walls and warns her he is taking the watchtower apart. Eiffel wishes her master good luck and leaves as told. Kelvin launches a power wave of wind at Clive and disassembles the watchtower. He uses the magic from the watchtower to form 5 obsidian edges, gigantic metal arrows, and launches one at Clive, who on the brink of being hit surrounds himself with a hard green transparent magic ball. Clive admits Kelvin scared him a little, but he is the main character, and he Kelvin, is just a nobody. Kelvin sinisterly asks Clive how long he spent making the character and mocks him for being a Mr. Hottie main character. He launches the remaining 4 obsidian edges at Clive, who instantly surrounds himself once again with a green neon ball. Kelvin begins shooting magic shots with his staff. Clive tells him he is wasting his time because nothing can pass through his helix barrier, whether it is magical or physical. He points out that normally, anything that touches it is destroyed, but his weapons must be pretty tough and scatters them by breaking the helix barrier. Kelvin gives off a maniac laugh, but Clive mockingly warns him to protect his back instead of laughing creepily. Kelvin turns around and blocks an attack from one of Clive's servants. 4 levitating servants engage in a close-range battle with Kelvin. Kelvin observes the look in their eyes and accuses Clive of charming people to fight for him. Clive smiles and tells him they are all happy to serve a super handsome master like him, and points out Kelvin is outnumbered by 5 of them. Kelvin smiles and assures him that is not the case. Clive urges him to stop talking and die already and surrounds himself with his helix barrier. A shot of Eiffels' arrow passes through his proclaimed unbreakable barrier. Kelvin shows up with his army of 4 golems to even his odds. Kelvin commands his golems not to kill the servants so that he can break the charm Clive used on them later on. Now, in a 1-on-1 battle, Clive draws out his spear and takes his stance. The 2 men take their fight high into the sky. Clive commends Kelvin for being able to keep up with him and challenges him to see who is faster while shooting magic shots at him. Kelvin dodges his shots and sends shots of his own. The fight becomes faster as the 2 throw and counter magic shots. Clive impressively commends Kelvin and asks him mockingly to be his servant. He releases flexible beams of purple lights which begin chasing Kelvin up into the sky. After his first attempt fails, Clive begins shooting light beams while chasing Kelvin. Kelvin tells him his attacks are affecting his servants, but Clive laughs maniacally and tells him they can die for all he cares, and he still has plenty of servants to spare. Clive laughs at Kelvin for caring about the people. He tells him the power he got when he reincarnated is a cheat that lets him do whatever he wishes. He teases Kelvin over enjoying the thrills and power of the land. Kelvin admits that strong power makes him feel fulfilled and excited. He states that if one only cares about oneself and not the people around them, it means they are pathetic and ugly and nothing else. Clive frowns and announces he does not like him. Kelvin easily makes it clear he too does not like him. Clive surrounds himself with the helix barrier and charges towards Kelvin. Kelvin equally unleashes Vortex Edge. The 2 men clash and begin a power struggle. After a few minutes of power struggle, their magic explodes into a white, bright gleam of light. Kelvin manages to cut Clive's left cheek. He palpitates with anger over his scarred face. Kelvin feeds Clotho his broken rod. He asks Clive if the cut in his face taught him a little about pain. Clive shuns him and promises to destroy him. He unleashes his true power, an ultimate rank S magic. Kelvin smiles and asks him to show him all he has got. Clive warns Kelvin not to underestimate him and surrounds himself with a transparent multicolored ball which begins spinning and wraps a tornado-like magenta wind around itself. In a matter of seconds, the wind engulfs the whole area, turning the atmosphere magenta. He explains to Kelvin that rank S magic is the most powerful magic a mage can have, and its power is akin to that of a natural disaster. Clive claims nobody can stop him in his Tempest barrier. Kelvin orders Clotho to vomit out a Blackstaff disaster rank S. He gives out a deep breath. He admits to initially not intending to destroy a village connected to Eiffel, but is left with no choice. He begins incantation for his next massive spell and confesses to not being able to try it out before. He unleashes Boreas Death Scythe, a rank S magic used to cut through S-ranked magic, upon his enemy and slices through Clive's Tempest barrier. Kelvin points out he missed his target. Clive lands on the ground and begins crying over his lost legs. Kelvin charges towards him to finish him off, but before his blade can reach him, Clive disappears. Another floating young man with a strangely armored, large, equally floating beast introduces himself as Trison's Mixer Demon Beast Army General, Tristan Faze, and admits to being the one who came up with the plan to attack the Elven village. Kelvin tells him he is going to pay for initiating such a plan, but should first hand over Clive. Tristan denies his request and tells him the General, Clive, still has value. Kelvin points out the monster possesses an unusual skill, and Tristan commends him for knowing a lot about summoning. He admits they had been beaten, and announces their retreat. After his disappearance, his voice resonates through the atmosphere. He calls Kelvin a black summoner and promises they will meet again. With the enemies gone, Kelvin's party members communicate through the servant network and ask if he is okay. Sarah gushes over the rank S spell he unleashed during his fight. At his post, Gerald asks what happened to the enemy general. Kelvin apologizes for letting him go and informs them he is heading back to the village. Later on that night, Eiffel assures the Elder they defeated Trison's rank S monster and their general, and the village is safe now. Nelrus thanks them and others the villagers to prepare a banquet to celebrate their victory and thank their saviors. Gerald teases Eiffel over their master's speech of warning Clive to stay away from his woman. Eiffel nervously admits hearing her master say that made her happy. Kelvin lands behind them and asks Eiffel what she said he said. Eiffel turns red and hot from nervousness. In the forest, Rian, Sarah, and Melfina compete in a race over their master being the first to praise one of them. Ryan wins with a new spell she created. Kelvin praises Ryan over defeating a rank S monster. In a basement in Trion, Clive wakes up chained with his limbs complete and asks where he is. Trion assured him not to worry over his lost legs as it has been rejuvenated. Clive desperately asks what is going on. Tristan launches a cursed maze at him and tells him his servant Gildora prepared 1,342 cursed weapons in total, and he is curious to know what will happen to him when he, Clive, is hit with all of them. He states that as a reincarnation, he is a perfect test subject and assigns a servant to heal him whenever necessary, and to make sure he does not die. Clive begs, as the servants begin hitting him with various cursed weapons. Tristan gives a sinister smile and walks away. In the elven village, Kelvin's servant, his party, and the villagers are having a merry night while Kelvin watches from a distance. Elif walks up to her master holding a little package and asks if he is thinking about something. He admits to thinking about how blessed he has been since he came into the new world, and how important it was when he met all of them. He asks what she has in her hands. Ephil mentions it was given to her by the elder, a small box containing her mother, Lumi's belongings. She tells him she is so glad she got to come to the elven village, and the elder and other elves all treated her kindly enough, even though she is half-elven. She points out she finally got to find out about her mother. Kelvin offers to help her put on her mother's hair clip and commends its beauty. Ephil promises to work harder for her master and asks if she may continue to serve him forever. Kelvin smiles and tells her he will be glad to have her around forever. The rest of his servant interrupts their little chat. Kelvin and Ephil stand up to receive their fellow party members. A little female elf runs up to Kelvin to thank him for protecting her village. She hugs Kelvin, begins sobbing, and laughs suddenly. The little girl apologizes for appearing in the form of a little elf. She introduces herself as Leonhard again, the Beast King of Guan. Kelvin and his servant gasped in disbelief. The king tells them he has an item that changes his form, and commends Kelvin for his great work. Leonhard informs Kelvin that he passed his rank S exam, and in 4 days, an official promotion ceremony will be held where he will have a mock battle with other rank S adventurers, and urges him to be at his best because the event is a big festival for the whole country. Kelvin gives off a sinister laugh over having to fight other rank S adventurers.